So
We can do it.
Kyle, 5 or 10 minutes for opening remarks, and then if you wouldn't mind, we'd like to open it up to questions from club members.
Sounds good. So good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. Again, Kyle Ishmael, Chair of the New York County Democratic Committee, also known as the Manhattan Democratic Party. Hi, friends. Both in Hill, for those that I don't know as well. And of course, many of you as you know, as we said, some for freedom events or some other county committee events around the county or judicial conventions, things like that. So yeah, as has been said, I have been engaged with the Manhattan Democratic Party for quite some time now, officially since 2018, when I was tasked by County Leader Keith Wright, former Assembly Member Keith Wright, to be Executive Director. At the time, as my long resume stated, I was working in the state legislature as the Executive Director of the state's Black, Brown, Hispanic, Asian Legislative Caucus. Many of you may know there's the kind of big New York conference that happens every year in February in Albany. That's the nonprofit side that throws the big conference. They raise money for scholarships for kids all across the state. But there is also the government side of that caucus, and it is the largest caucus of its kind. It was had somewhere around like 60 some odd members when I was the executive director. It has now grown to I think like in the 80s, like 81 members. Basically, that's all the Assembly and Senate members of color across the state, and they come together to conference. Obviously, this is New York State. For the most part, they are Democrats. During my time there, they were all Democrats. And, it's just it's an opportunity for legislators to come together to try to find some common ground on legislation that they're advancing for their communities, right? To look for their shared values and to advance legislation that people in largely communities of color around the state, but not only communities of color around the state, can benefit from. Obviously, our leadership in New York is very diverse. We have a Black woman who leads the state Senate. We have a Black man who leads the state assembly. We have our first woman governor. We have our first woman attorney general, and Tish James. So we have a very diverse state, right? So over the years, the caucus itself has increased, its kind of prominence and power, right? Because the speaker herself is a member of the body, the leader herself is a member of the body. And so I say all that to say that in coming up, doing that work, right, advancing policy in the state legislature at a time where it was like ballooning in the amount of diversity that it had, leading the caucus, right, it allowed for me to build some really strong relationships across the state, as well as here, in Manhattan, in the county, amongst the elected officials here. So that's in part the reason why the county leader asked me to join as executive director. I loved doing that work. I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm an attorney by trade. I practiced family law for a number of years before I started working in city government, and then in nonprofit, and city government, and state government, and did the federal for some time. So I have a lot of kind of government experience in government and around government. I had done politics over the years. Actually, my first campaign was 2005. I was 20 years old at St. John's University. I was a Democrat, always been registered a Democrat. However, I was a good friend with somebody who was in the college Republicans. And he was like, I bet you won't go work for Mayor Bloomberg. And I was like, I bet you I will. So my first job was actually one of the few Democrats on Mayor Bloomberg's re-election campaign in 2005. I'm proud to say that I was part of the team that allowed him to run as an independent that year. So I was part of the transition from Republican back to Democrat. That's the year that he ran, yes, for the Republican nomination, but also as an independent. And then obviously we all know that he became a Democrat again, where it's failed, it's embarrassing run for president. So, no offense to anybody who was supporting him, but it wasn't very many. So I know I got some things. But yeah, so I started off actually working for a Bloomberg campaign in 2005 and worked, kind of a number of campaigns from that. But being able to kind of take my history and experience at that point, back in 2018, and pivot to doing something more overtly political and kind of, very civics minded, right? It's one thing to like work on policy and, advance that in the, the kind of marble chambers of the Capitol, 2.5 hours away from New York City. But I found myself really wanting to engage on like who is in those rooms, not just what we're doing in those rooms, but like who's in those rooms, right? Who gets to be in those rooms making decisions. And so I was happy to join, excuse me, happy to join the party as executive director, and really learn a lot. About the processes of the organization. I think somebody that being an attorney, I'm somebody who's always interested in like the rules and the process and how, all of us kind of collectively agree that like, this is how we're going to do this thing. And then attempting to do it and then often failing and then trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to reattempt to do this thing? I find that really interesting. And I find the way the Democrats do it very messy, but very necessary. I think that we are always or almost always on the right side of history. Just get out of our way. We get a lot more done. So I try to dedicate making sure that the processes, the functions, the structures are in place so that we can get things done. So that elected officials can do the things that folks in communities want done. And I'll kind of end there, right? I want to definitely get to questions, but that's, I think, kind of like my ethos and how I do this work and how what I've done and the work experiences that I've had have really brought me here, not just like literally the position that I'm in, but kind of the thinking, and the approach to the work. So hopefully that's a good opener.
It's a perfect opener, and I can tell you've been doing this for a little bit. You timed it very well. You kind of ended right on schedule. What we're going to do is, and I think we alerted you to this, is because we have this reform working group, I'm first going to call on members from that group to ask questions, and then I'd like to open it more to the general audience. I think our first questioner may be someone you recognize, Mr. Bob Jackman.
Never seen it before. Yeah, wanna grab my mic here, boss?
Well, so as new chair of the county committee, what do you want to see us do different as a county committee? What's your vision?
So this is, it's a loaded question, right? But I think that, so I hope this is not controversial, I don't know, and if it is, it is. I'm someone who thinks that, so I won't assume, but everyone knows, like, or maybe people don't, the Manhattan Democratic Party is what's known as a reform party, right? So many years back, and I'm sure folks in this room, know this story even better than I do and can tell it better than I can. But many years back, back in the Tammany Hall days, the Democratic Party had basically gotten so corrupted it was like a joke, right? We still kind of joke about it now, the Tammany Hall days. I think it started nobly, right? Like it was about giving people opportunity through community, right? Like, whether you run an organization, whether you run a political group, any civic club, right? Like you're effectively looking to hook up your neighbors, right? Like, do you need a job? Do you need babysitting? Do you need, it's about community and serving each other. So I wasn't around then, but I have to imagine that it began in a kind of very noble, thought process, right? Like different immigrant groups coming to New York looking for opportunities. But eventually that's not what it was. Or at least it wasn't that for everyone, right? And so when you kind of pull the equity and the inequality out of something that may have started off nobly, you're kind of, you do need reform. So our party reformed. We became not a top-down party, but a very bottom-up party. I mean, that's why we have Democratic clubs. That's why, you effectively kind of run your own, fiefdoms. And effectively it's the function, and given all that, right, long story short, the party itself, the party structure, the county party has effectively become, it's our job to do the statutory things, right? Host the meeting so that when you have a vacancy, you can fill it. We're not telling you who to fill it with, right? We're not, and Bob, you can feel free to take a seat.
No, I've got a second.
Um,
I'm in the wings. Right ahead.
But sorry, where was that?
Vacancies.
Yeah, so there's the kind of, statutory function of the party. But I think where basically what I'm saying is I think that what we have done has gone a little bit too far. And what I say, what I mean by saying that is that at times there's a question of what the purpose of the party is, right? We are not, for example, we don't come out with a list of policy priorities. We don't say we're the Democratic Party and we want to see our Manhattan delegation support bills X through, 1 through 100, right? And perhaps some people think that we should. I'm somebody who thinks that we shouldn't necessarily. As I said earlier, right, I'm someone who thinks that, we should be ensuring that our processes are well, that, the structures are in place for individual candidates and members and communities to do what they want to do. But I think that at the very least, until we get that right, until we are structured in a way that people feel is supporting the party, structurally moving in the direction that it needs to move into, I don't know if we can really wade into, kind of substantive policy conversations. I do think that the party has a place to weigh in on things that kind of directly impact the party, right? So judicial seats, right, and making a push for more judges, not just because we want them, but because we think it's good for democracy, right? So things like that, I think particularly now when we have Trump 2.0, we literally have somebody who is trying to become a dictator. I think it's incumbent upon the, big D Democratic Party to really fight hard for small d democracy and to strengthen it and to find new and innovative ways for us to be a stronger democracy and perhaps to be thinking about doing that in ways that we haven't done it before. And I think it's amazing that we have these kind of grassroots, very grassroots, clubs. You guys can have these conversations about what we should look like as a party in Manhattan and perhaps serve as a model for the Democratic Party across the state, across the country, right? So long answer, I know, but I think that we do need to find a way. There is a lot of value, and I hope I'm making my point. There is a lot of value in our structure as it is. I was literally with Rodney Spachat, who's the chair of the Brooklyn Dems yesterday at an event, and I always make a point to kind of talk some shit and make it clear that Manhattan Democratic Party is better. But I do think that we could mobilize as a county more if we were to have a conversation. And I'm not necessarily saying that I have the answers, but I think that people don't need the county as much. And I would like to find ways for the party and for Democrats to find use and value in the county party.
So Bob, I think I want to go, members of the committee ask questions and then I'll call on
Right
right
ahead.
now too.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Benjamin Haberman, you had a question? Do you want to come up and ask it?
I can also with the mic. I mean,
I have it here. Do you want me to read it off? I have it.
Go ahead.
Okay, Ben's question is, how can the county committee help Manhattan Democratic clubs to build membership?
Oh, great question. And we're also on Zoom, so hello to everybody. Apologies. I think the one of the clearest ways that we can help to build new members for the party at large and then specifically for clubs, and I know that this is probably on everybody's mind, but it's connecting with younger members, connecting with younger voters, connecting with younger residents. And I know that that's often the answer, but then it begs the question, how do we do that? And I'll tell you, as chair of the party, and even as executive director of the party, I do this often and speak to clubs and speak to groups, and I've spoken to Manhattan Young Dems, often on many occasions, and they're saying the same thing. It's like us old heads, and I'm putting us in and myself in that bucket, saying, oh, we need more young people here. And I go talk to the young people, and they're like, we need to get in there. We're the old people. And so I'm always kind of looking for like, well, if you guys are out here trying to come in, and we're in here trying to find a way to let you, like, what's missing? And often I what I tell them, and I know it's not always sufficient or what they want to hear, but I think it really is true, is that like politics is about who shows up. Like politics literally is who shows up, right? Like when you're a candidate and you're trying to win, you're thinking about turnout, who is going to turn out, right? Like not just, and you're actually looking at the pool of who are voters, but you're strictly thinking about the numbers and who's going to show up. You don't have mandatory voting in this country. You don't have, you're not required to vote in civics or in public life. Who knows what this country would be like if we were. But you're always trying to think about, well, what is my denominator, right? And who is going to show up, and then how do I, kind of move those people who do show up. And so I tell young people who have to show up, because at the end of the day, is another kind of analogy that I make, with sports. You can say to someone, look, kid, you can't kick that ball. You can't be on this team. Sorry, try another sport. But with politics, you're gonna take everyone who shows up, like everyone has the right to be here, everybody has the right to participate in this process, everybody has the right to have a vote and to have their voice be heard. And so we have to find ways to open up the door for other people. And I think it's also incumbent upon the party to help clubs do that, right? So the Manhattan Young Dems often have the Open Seat Project to coordinate with clubs and say, okay, of your county committee members, of your amount of county committee seats, you got 100 seats, maybe you have 6 vacancies. Can we work with you to find some in your district who you can either run or appoint to those seats, and kind of bring it to your clubs and kind of get folks in the door that way. So that's something that's definitely, it's been successful. There's been a lot of people who are engaged with Manhattan Young Dems, who are engaged with Manhattan Dems through that program over the years. I think there's years where it's a little more prominent than others, right? Depending on who in Manhattan Young Dems is kind of running that program, and what the awareness of it is. But we're also happy to, find other kind of pipelines and ways to bring more people in. But like I said, I also often encourage young people to simply show up. I know that it can be daunting. I know, it's confusing. How does this thing work for these people? They can't always necessarily go on a website either and get information about the meeting. There are some clubs who are very organized and do virtual things and, make themselves more accessible. And there's some that aren't. And again, I think that's another way that the party could be helpful in trying to bridge some of those even technological gaps to make it easier for folks to hold a hybrid meeting if they need to, so they can, access more people. But yeah, always happy to find one.
So in the interest of showing how virtual we are, we're going to call on Jordan Stein, one of our members who's on the line with Zoom right now.
Jordan.
Hey there. Sorry, I was a little cranky, so sorry if there's some screaming in the background. But how can Manhattan clubs share best practices? Just to give you an idea of what I'm saying, I think for Freedoms, one of the things we do really well is bringing in young people. But one of the things that I've really admired about other clubs that I've been trying to do here, and frankly, I think we could improve on, is getting our county committee members more involved and getting them to organize their buildings and really view it as more than a role you show up once every 2 years for.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think 2 things come to mind. Number one, with regards to best practices, right? I think that we, as clubs, as district leaders, right, as leaders of the party, should be utilizing the time that we have together a little bit better. For example, district leaders, as the executive committee, meet once a month. And so over the years, we've kind of worked to make sure that we have an agenda that's pretty, streamlined. Obviously, there's a process if you want to add things to the agenda. But it's always an effort to make sure that we're having as much robust conversation as possible, that we're utilizing each other, as much as possible. And so I think that that's an area where, and this often happens, right? We're in meetings and a district leader will say, we're doing X, Y, Z, in our part or in our district. And, somebody else may say, oh, that's a great idea. We may want to do that. Or can we partner with you on that? That definitely does happen, of course. But I think that we can be more intentional about trying to find or trying to create ways for this to happen. You know what I mean? And so I think this goes along with a little bit what I was saying earlier. I would love for us to have conversations about how we should be looking to, whether it's reform or change or adapt, innovate as a party. This may be an area, right? What are ways that we can almost force clubs to come together to work on things, so that we're in a position where people, have to kind of work together and can share best practices. So, kind of a both ends, finding, always looking for ways and sharing in meetings, but then finding some structural, whether it's programs, events, that we can kind of all come together on to partner with.
Jill Eisner, do you want to ask a question?
Sure. I love you, and I'll just. Okay, so my comment, shouldn't the county committee corral its members to support progressive issues and candidates in the city of New York, including the propositions on the other side of the ballot that we don't hear about at all?
Great question. This is great too, because I think it allows for a little nuance you know, from the answer I gave earlier, with regards to like, you know, kind of substantive policy, right? I think to me, I think like propositions are bigger, kind of like, you know, they're civic exercises, right? Like they're on the ballot. To me, anything that's on the ballot is fair game for a Democratic Party to kind of organize around, you know, educate around, you know, because it's candidates, obviously, that then once they're in office, they decide the policy. And I think that's the distinction, at least for me, right? And I think that, you know, a district at the, just for example, right, a district at the southern tip of the borough, not that geography necessarily means anything, but may feel a different way about, stupid example, but fracking. Than like someone in the northern part of the district, right? Again, stupid example. But you know, I think that like leaving some room for the kind of substantive policy difference that you may find in different communities is good. But I think that those things that are very clearly like, this is a ballot measure, right? Like this impacts democracy, this impacts the party, this impacts how many judicial, you know, judges that we have, you know, things like that. I think that those are definitely areas that are ripe for the party kind of, you know, again, organizing around, planning around. And again, not to say that individual clubs or obviously elected officials or candidates or district leaders couldn't like, you know, advance an issue or organize their local community on an issue. But I think that the party, the bigger party structure should be more focused on those multi-democratic issues.
Thanks. Next, I'd like to call on John Wagner.
Jen, you know, the making the county committee more bottom up rather than top down. And what I'd like to ask is whether the county committee or we as a club can do something to have that same impact on the state committee. Can we make the state committee more big D democratic?
No, I mean, obviously, I'd say the answer is yes, because at the end of the day, we, you know, the party, we are, right, like it drives me crazy with Republicans, like, you know, their whole ethos is bashing government is just people, like, it's just us government. But yeah, right, like who you send as your state committee member, right, the process by which you determine the candidates that you like, how you kick the tires on your candidates, right? Like, again, those are all things that as a party, we don't tell you how to do it, nor do we tell you who it should be. So that means you have the freedom to, are we gonna do forums? Are we gonna do questionnaires? Are we gonna, you know, and those are all things that clubs are free to decide to do. So obviously that's a way in which you help to influence the state party, right? Who are the two state committee members that you send up? What do they believe in? What, you know, what are the kind of reforms perhaps that you're looking for the state party to advance? And then obviously, like anything else, how are you able to like build a coalition? Right? Are there other state committee members? Are there perhaps resolutions that we as a county that are state committee members could be getting behind? You know, over the years, as executive director, you know, obviously I've only been chair for just, you know, under a year, several months at this point. But as executive director, I would go, you know, often to some state committee meetings, not all of them because I've been required to, but I would often go. And I've seen, you know, many times over the years, state committee members kind of come together to advance a resolution, to look for some reforms. I think especially as of late, you know, the last few years where New York has kind of, you know, bubbled up a little bit more in terms of importance on the federal level in terms of congressional lines and things like that, and Donald Trump doing better here. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's the opportunity for that. I think similarly to when I say that, I think that we as a county should be having more of a conversation about our structure and you know, we reformed many years ago, but what does that mean? What does that look like? How are we truly being responsive in this new time? You know, I think similarly, we could be having a conversation about, you know, how does that look on the state level, and what can we do as a club, but also how can we lift that up as a party to be influential on, you know, and what that looks like. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call Ruth Sosa.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The question I have is, if Democrats keep disappointing us, how can you keep expecting us to vote for Democrats?
Yeah.
And my answer is I don't. And, you know, it's just logic, right? Like if you, if Democrats keep disappointing you, keep disappointing us, we cannot expect them to keep voting for us. And I think that's exactly what happened, in 2024, right? I think they kind of, or at least enough, Democrats, Republicans as well, but the governing body, I think failed the American public to the point where enough of them started like, it didn't matter. Regardless of what your issue was, regardless of what your, you know, substantive thing was, I think enough people, and obviously it's not everyone, right? But I think enough people felt like they weren't gonna get what they needed, what they wanted, what was called, what we ultimately needed, enough for them to feel engaged enough to participate. Like I said, it's that denominator, right? And so if that denominator changes, you know, you get a different number, different result. And so I think that we are absolutely at an inflection point as a party, in that, like, we obviously can't keep doing the same thing, right? I think we can all agree on that, right? Like, you can't keep doing, like, you stuff, we gotta figure something out. You know, I think, all right, you know, sometimes I think that it's been said that, like, Democrats need, like, a savior, right? Like, and, you know, I turned 41 tomorrow, actually.
Another round.
But like I say it to say like you know, when I was very active, you know, politically when Obama you know, came up, and I think about like where we were then and like where we are now, and like, you know, do we need a savior? Right? Like I think that was like a 2008 was like savior time, right? Like it was coming off of Bush, and it's crazy to think how bad we saw like the position we thought we were in back then, like compared to now. And I wonder, like, do we need a savior, right? Or can we as a party like stop trying to rely on like one guy, you know, to be like JFK and smooth and cool and handsome, or Barack Obama who's smooth and cool and handsome, and like can we like, you know, get our shit together in a way that's like more sustainable? I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be the case. We absolutely need leaders, right? I mean, I think I'm someone that like, you know, folks. This is another thing too. Well, I also think that like everyone has become analysts, and so I don't even think like I don't think we elect our like based off of what we're more and more electing our leaders based off of like where our neighbor wants, right? So I'm not voting based on who I think should be president. I'm voting on who I think my neighbor is going to accept as president. And so it ends up in this weird, like, we don't end up with the like person that we all want. You know, we're all just like analyzing who we think someone else wants. And I think that we need to, number one, stop doing that, right? I being, you know, chair of Manhattan Dems and all the stuff, I also run my own, you know, consulting firms. So I do political analysis, but I don't think everyone should. At least thinking about, you know, your own vote, and who you want to represent you, and your interests and your family, who's going to be best for your family. And I think that far too much people are, you know, thinking about, well, who's my neighbor going to vote for, who they accept, rather than just thinking about who, you know, want. And so I think if Democrats stop looking for like that thing that will solve the problem, and instead focus on who is going to be better for us as Americans, as citizens, who's going to be better for my life, for my neighbors, I think we would.
So we get some good leaders, but they're pushed out
Yeah.
by, you know, I'm talking about.
But like that, I mean, to me, that, and obviously I'm being a little foolish. Yeah, I'm being a little foolish, but like that's because like it's democracy, right? So, you know, you have this group over here that likes this person, and that group over here that likes that person. How do you then?
But why is it
Yeah.
always the established, multi-term person who gets so much advantage anyway? And you're talking about raising up young people, hopefully raising up young progressives. What is the committee doing to even the playing field and bring new talent for a democracy that desperately needs it? What is the first thing you're going to do?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do
Yeah.
is things like this, right?
What's the
I'm
second?
young, and I'm here, and I'm showing up, and I'm having a conversation.
Jane, you gotta let him answer the question.
Look, I get it. Again, I'm a young person who again showed up, right? Like I showed up in the room, I inserted myself, and that's part of the advice that I tell others to, to do as well. So trust, the path that I love, it should be there. Again, this is in part what I'm doing, right, as leader. I'm talking to people, I'm talking to the committee members, I'm making sure that I'm showing up and that others within the committee are showing up.
And we appreciate that.
Thank you. Oh, of course. Oh, of course. This is an offensive response. This is an affirmative response about what it is that we as a party need to be doing. I'm somebody who believes, the Democratic Party is like, I didn't get paid as an executive director. I obviously don't get paid as as an elected party official. None of us do. And so coming in as chair, one thing that I said to district leaders and folks who are leading committees, is that, none of us get paid to do this work. But what I want is for folks to be in good positions, right? So leading a committee that they have interest in and can put a little time into, because if we can all pour in a little, then the Democratic Party can go far, right? Whereas, I'll be honest, when I was executive director, there were times when I was doing literally everything, right? And so over the years, we've had district leaders like Rebecca, like him, like, all your district leaders, frankly, all your district leaders here for free. That's not really been much of an issue, but more district leaders taking on more responsibility, understanding more of the party. But I think a lot of times what has happened in the past, and I mean the past, like before I was here, because I do think that I've been doing some good work, particularly in this vein over the last several years. But I think a lot of what happened in the past is that people didn't know what was going on from a kind of party standpoint, from the county party standpoint. Obviously, folks would be plugged into their local clubs. But to your point, right, it would be questions of what is the party doing for this and what is the party doing for that? And I think a lot of it just came from ignorance, right? And I don't mean that in the negative, but literally not knowing, well, what is the purpose of the party? And if I'm seeing a problem, well, I have to imagine that the leaders should be trying to solve it, right? And so I think this is in part how we do that is number one, opening the party up more, not just to say, hey, we're sharing information, but we're sharing in how we do things. Right, like we're when there are vacancies now, for Senate, for Assembly, for any position, it's not Kyle coming in and creating the meeting and setting up the process and doing the list and doing it's it's Rebecca, it's Kim, it's we have members now who are responsible for taking up different pieces of this exercise, this civic engagement that we're all engaged in. And so I know, well, but I think to get back to the crux of your question, I think opening up the party, making sure that the things that we want to see done are getting done, have a pathway to get done, at least have a conversation about how they get done. It becomes, in these last couple, meetings, in part because of the work that the people in this room have done. And so I think we have to keep doing that. And making sure that folks know how the party works so that they can change how the party works.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we only have time for one more question. Bob, you had started off. Do you want to end it up or do you want me to call?
Let's let somebody from the.
Okay, Deborah, I see your hands up. Deborah?
With the midterm elections coming up, I'm curious to know ways you think New York and New York City particularly has always had a lot of people who are willing in New York City to get on buses and go, to other districts, to other places and so, my feeling was that in the past presidential election, there was not as much, even though there was a lot of coordination, there could have been more. And that is the party working to help with that, and to see how you can get New Yorkers to even more than before go to the places where it really matters to work together.
Cool. No, yeah, great question. Yes, to all that. In the sense of, we, again, as the party, we want to support the local clubs. There have been so many clubs over the years who have organized trips, who have asked for the party to step in different ways, whether it's financially or whether it's communication and getting the word out for things. So yes, we're happy to continue doing that. I think we should, obviously, be doing that. I'll say, particularly after 2024, right, where the whole, country looked at New York like, oh, what's going on over there? I thought you guys were good. I thought we didn't have to pay attention to you at all. My hope is that we can like really solidify home. I think it's great, obviously, that, send people out to Pennsylvania, when it's necessary, or, any kind of neighboring state. I know folks went to New Jersey for the race that, they had over there. But I think that we obviously, Long Island doesn't look great for Democrats ever, in the last several years. We have, even in the primary, right? I know, there's the exciting, New York 12, and there's all the drama in New York 10, and, I would love to see, and Keith and I love to brag about Manhattan being, the only borough that has no Republicans. And so to me, that means that we are the borough that should be leading the charge, right? Like I like to use this phrase of the blue, the big blue seawall of Manhattan. We should be leading the charge and going out and helping people. And so that's something that, as chair, as a party, I want to be extremely supportive of. Again, we're top down. So it's likely never going to be a situation and I'm like, hey guys, I got us a bus, get on it. It's going to be you guys saying, we're organizing the bus, or we want to organize the bus. How can the party help us? And whether it's us having to do a fundraiser so that you have funds to do it, whether it's communication, whether it's just, sharing the word amongst others, whether it's making sure that we're nudging the electeds to show up and join you and support you, whether it's coordinating with Manhattan Young Dems, if we have to get the New York State Young Dems, if we have to get the state Dems, right? Like those are all relationships that we hold as a county party. And like I said, we don't do a lot, and I want to have more conversations about what we as a party could be doing and what structural changes we need to make so that we can. But I do want to make sure that the tools that we do have in our toolkit, that people, that we're able to utilize them and be helpful to us.
Hey, Cal, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is the beginning of the conversation. We really appreciate you being here and look forward to continuing this conversation. Happy birthday. I'd now like